Hey, I'm Jenny Davis, and welcome to the ABA Journal's 10 Questions Live, our monthly conversation with innovators, interrupters, and just plain interesting lawyers. I'm here today with Judge Phyllis Fry. She is a Houston attorney who specializes in LGBT issues, and she's also the first openly transgender judge in the nation. She was born Phyllis Fry in San Antonio. She served in the military, is a graduate of Texas A&M, and is an Eagle Scout. And she has been living openly as Phyllis Fry for more than 40 years. Now, across that 40 years, she's been a tireless and effective advocate for transgender issues, both as a citizen and as a licensed lawyer, and she has been called the grandmother of the national political and legal transgender movement. Now, Fry's fight has never been more relevant than it is today, with all of the bathroom issues that have been galvanizing the headlines. We are going to jump right into it today with Judge Fry. But first, I'd like to welcome her officially to 10 Questions Live. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I need to do a quick disclaimer.
Yes.
Yes, it's true, I am a judge, but I'm an associate judge, an associate municipal judge, which means I'm also an employee of the City of Houston, even though it's part-time. I cannot speak for the City of Houston, and I'm not speaking for the City of Houston, and I'm not speaking as a judge or someone on the bench. I'm speaking as a transgendered person. I'm speaking as a lawyer who has been doing transgender work since 1981 when I was licensed, and I'm speaking as the grandmother of the national legal and political movement for the transgender community. So even though you can call me judge, I would rather you call me Attorney Fry or Phyllis during this interview.
I will do that. And
bathrooms. Let's talk about bathrooms.
Let's go into it.
Let's talk about, because bathrooms the hot issue, and 11 states filed a lawsuit yesterday. Anyone who is listening to this really needs to pay attention to the fact that the journalists, the reporters on television and on radio and in the press are missing the central issue of the bathroom issue, because the anti-folks, the people who are anti-LGBT, the people who are anti-trans, I'll refer to them as the antis, whenever you pin them down, they come up with this argument that what they're most afraid of is that some man will claim to be transgender for the day, will claim to be a woman for the day, because they claim that gender identity is so fluid that you can do that, and that that man will go into the women's restroom and will do something horrendous, and especially will go in and mess with someone's little girl daughter. And now that the schools are involved, they are afraid that some teenage boy will go into the girls' restroom at school or the locker room and do horrible things. Okay. What they don't understand, and what the journalists are not asking, is this question: isn't all of that already against the law? Isn't that already in the criminal statutes of all of the states in the union? Let me give you an example. Suppose a man goes into the women's restroom and his intent is to expose himself. Well, in most states, and I know in Texas, that's a misdemeanor where he could be arrested and jailed for up to 6 months and fined up to $2,000. Let's suppose he wants to go in there and masturbate. Well, that's, in Texas anyway, is a 1 year in jail and a $4,000 fine. Let's assume he wants to go in there and play peeping Tom. That's voyeurism. And most voyeurism statutes start out at the misdemeanor level. They can be enhanced by multiple convictions, and if done with a child or against a child or peeping Tom of a child who's under 14, that can be elevated to a felony. Suppose that they want to do to trap the girl, the little girl, in the stall. Well, that's false imprisonment. That's also a felony, especially if it's done with a child. And if they want to do anything else, whether it's sexual assault of a child or whatever, they can do it. Now, whether it's in Virginia, or whether it's in Washington State, or whether it's in Hawaii, or whether it's in New York State, or any of the other states, I bet you that every state that you live in has criminal laws against indecent exposure, against public lewdness, against voyeurism, against video recording of people in the restrooms, against sexual assault of a child, false imprisonment, they're already against the law. They already have heavy penalties, and so there is no issue. This is a hoax issue. Now let's go back to the schools. The same teenage boy who's going to take his mother's wig and a padded bra and one of her skirts and put it in his backpack and go to school and put them on and go into the girls' restrooms to do any of the things I just described can, as a juvenile, also be convicted of all of these crimes. So this whole thing about restrooms is a hoax. Transgender people don't do this, and if you find a transgender person who does this, that person can be arrested and convicted and put in jail or prison, depending upon whether it's a misdemeanor or felony. So it's all a hoax, it's all silliness, and it's all a wedge issue. And I hope that people will Google their state's penal statutes and find out what they are: for indecent exposure, public lewdness, false imprisonment, sexual assault of a child, voyeurism, video recording in a restroom, and we'll start asking the journalists, the newspapers, the television anchors to start asking the antis this question: isn't that already illegal?
Well, and I know that you have firsthand knowledge of it, not only from your work in criminal law, but also you had bathroom issues working with an internship. Was it in the 80s when you were in law school for the Houston DA's office? You were given a restroom to use that was nowhere near where your office was, and in fact, you finished that internship with a bladder infection. We talked a little bit about it in our print conversation in the May issue of the ABA Journal, but I wanted to invite you to expand on that here and then talk a little bit about how this makes you feel seeing this issue come to the forefront so many years later, that it's still not resolved and doesn't seem close to being resolved.
This was in 1980. I was beginning my third year of law school, and the law school, in effect, told the prosecutor, the district attorney of Harris County, that if they didn't let me do my internship there, that they would no longer get law students to do internship with the DA's office. And so they took me. At the time, there was a law in Houston that made cross-dressing illegal, and so I was subject to arrest when I entered the DA's office. And there also was a restroom ordinance, which started in 1968 and is still on the books. And it says you can't use the restroom of the sex opposite, but here's the magic language: in a manner calculated to cause a disturbance, which I wasn't going to do, nor was any other transgender person going to do. But you know, it's kind of like when you get arrested illegally, you may be able to beat the trial, but you can't beat the ride. You may be able to beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride, which meant I would have been arrested and I would have gone to jail. Well, I lobbied against cross-dressing law, and it was repealed by City Council a week before I was supposed to start my intern, so they couldn't do that.
While you were still a law student, right?
Well, I was still a law student. I went to a law school against the cross-dressing law, and the law school said, we don't care. That was the University of Houston Law School, by the way. And so the DA's office said I could have the unisex restroom on the second floor, and my office was on the 10th floor. And to get to it, I had to go through security and all that other stuff to get to that area, and I refused to do it. And so at the end of the semester, I had a bladder infection, I had blood in my urine, and I'd had many accidents. During the early days of my transition back in 1976, when I did not pass very well, I tried to use the men's restroom, and I did it 3 times. And one of the things I learned was that the men's stall is usually dirty, and the doors are usually broken and won't work. And the other thing is, 2 of the 3 times, I was almost physically assaulted. So after 3 times, I quit using the men's restroom, and I've used the women's restroom exclusively for 40 years now without any incident.
And I'll go now to a reader question, and just a note on that, we can still accept questions. If you would like to email a question for Judge Fry, for Phyllis, to 10questionslive@gmail.com. We will try to get those questions on the air. But now a reader question. Do you have any solution for this? Maybe a unique and realistic solution to this issue?
Yes, one again is for people like you and anybody else watching this show to Google the law in their state and to really put it to the journalists to start asking the antis these questions. But the second thing is whenever a city or a state is beginning to enact these bills, that if they will get together a group of a dozen female to male transgendered persons who have been on male hormones, have deep voices, and already have facial hair to go to the hearings and tell them who they are and identify themselves to the people at the hearings and show them their birth certificates that say F, and then with the press lined up, go to the women's restrooms right outside of the hearing room and one at a time walk in to the women's restroom where they are going to be forced to use. Do you really want trans men that look like men and have facial hair and deep voices in the women's restroom if you pass a state law like North Carolina has that says you have to use the restroom according to what's on your birth certificate? And I think that would be very, very much of a wake-up call, as well as the fact that the antis continue to be asked, isn't this already what you're afraid of? Isn't there already criminal statutes against this?
Now, another reader question, do you think there's a role for dispute resolution specialists to counteract the polarization of our nation along LGBT issues?
I read that question earlier, and I really didn't have an answer then, and I really don't have an answer now. The way you deal with this is LGBT people continue to come out of the closet at work, to come out of the closet with their families, with their classmates, with their friends, and to ask these hard questions of journalists, television and print journalists. That's what I think, and if the dispute resolutors want to do that, go for it.
So and I did have a question about, to ask you your advice on how out someone should be if they're a transgender, and I know what you're going to say, like super out, but
no, actually, I'm going to surprise you. I'm not going to say that. Everybody has to pay their own rent. Everybody has to pay their own bills, and some people are already either unemployed or underemployed, as I was for a very long time. Because you mentioned I was in the military. That was my first career, and I was pushed out of the military because they learned that I cross-dressed in private. And then my second career is engineering, and I practiced engineering for a number of years, and I have a license in engineering with 2 engineering degrees, and I was blackballed when I began to come out in 1976 as trans. So I am on my 3rd career. And during that period of time, from the time I was blackballed until my law career finally began to take off, which was a period of time of about, I would say, 6 or 7 years, I really, really struggled. Most of my income came from selling Amway cleaning products at gay bars in Houston, and my wife of 43 years now, who stayed with me, we struggled financially, but we made it. So I can't tell you to come out of the closet, but what I will tell you is this. I did come out of the closet in '76. At the time, there was a law that made me subject to arrest. I fought it. I got it changed. I went to law school while I was still illegal, out of the closet. I went down to the courthouse as a lawyer, and I was the only out lawyer down there. I've been the only out lawyer a lot of different places. It's been a struggle, but I made it. Now, if I can do that in the mid-'70s and in the early '80s, it's 2016. It's time to come out. I don't wear a sign that says I'm trans, but anybody that wants to become close to me, either as an associate or as someone who wants to work with me, or someone who wants to befriend me down at the courthouse, someone who wants to get a little closer than just, you know, a casual acquaintance. I don't want to be hurt later on by investing myself in them to find out that they are going to withdraw from me from finding out I'm trans. So I make sure early on, if someone is starting to come anywhere close into my circle, that they know that I'm trans. Because if they're going to say bye, I want them to say bye before I invest anything, any time, or any emotion into them. I think that's the healthy thing to do. So that's where I am.
And what do you think will be the next battleground, assuming that the bathroom issue is a stepping stone? What do you think the next key legal issue will be?
Well, you know, it's going to end up in the courts. Right now, we as transgendered people are federally protected in employment with respect to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We are protected under Title IX, which is going to be litigated. In the schools, we are becoming more protected in health insurance because the Office of Personnel Management that handles insurance for federal employees has been instructed that they can no longer do blanket exclusions of health care for transgender people. We are covered with respect to the Department of State on passports. So there's a lot of federal protection. Now, in the states, if you work for a company that has less than 15 employees, you don't have federal protection. And if you're not in the schools, you don't have Title IX protection. So, you know, you're kind of stuck. And you're just going to have to do the best you can. But all of this is going to be litigated in the future. And all of these federal policies come from federal departments who are overseen by presidential appointees. So if there's not a Democrat in the White House in 2017, all of this can be rolled back regardless of what happens in the courts.
Well, I know in your private practice, you help trans and all LGBT clients deal with issues. What does your practice look like? What are some of the things that you're doing for your clients?
You know, we got a really neat practice here in Houston. There's 6 lawyers. My name's first. And we hold ourselves out to be an out-of-the-closet LGBTI, I for intersex, and supportive straight people. And we do get a lot of LGBTI clients, but most of our clients, believe it or not, are people who are straight and who want to be with lawyers who are supportive and out of the LGBTI community. And in fact, the minority, the LGBT lawyers in our firm are in the minority. And so we just got good people here. And we kind of call ourselves one-stop shop, in that, you know, we handle almost anything that most individuals need. And of course, we have a website, liberatinglaw.com, and it's really exciting and fun to work here. We're pretty loose, and Friday's Dog Day.
That's awesome.
2 of our lawyers bring their puppies, and you know, but we, you know, the lawyers who work here, we don't care if they're cat lovers, and we don't even discriminate against left-handed people. And so we do pretty good here, and it's a lot of fun.
So I have a reader question about in situations where maybe someone's not hostile at all, they just don't know or have never met someone who's not, I guess, what would you say, gender, who's from the LGBTI community.
Yeah, they don't understand gender identity or gender expression.
How would you educate them? Do you have any tips for things to say, maybe to make them feel more comfortable? And how did you create your network of support among your professional colleagues?
Well, the way I created my network of support was that I won a lot. I practiced criminal defense law for about 30 years, and I didn't win all my cases, but I did win a lot of them. And even when I didn't win, prosecutors learned that I knew how to try a case. One of my favorite stories is a very bad client that I had. And he was looking as an habitual at a minimum of 25 years, and the prosecutor wouldn't go down. And I kept telling her if she would go down to 15, he would take a plea bargain. She says, no, we're going to try it. And so I asked her, I said, how long is this trial going to take? And she says, this is going to be a slam dunk. We can do this in 2.5 days. And I held up 5 fingers. And I said, this is going to take 5 days. And she says, no, it's not. And I said, yeah, it really is. I know how to make it last 5 days. I know how to do the procedure, ask the questions, go through the things, extend my voir dire, whatever it takes. This will last 5 days. And it did last 5 days. And my client was found guilty. And the jury gave him 40 years. But I'll tell you what, that prosecutor had to spend the next 3 weekends in the office playing catch-up on her office work because it went for 5 days instead of 2.5 days. And prosecutors learned that I was straight with them, and even if I lost, that I would make them work. And so I got good plea bargains. That's how you win over people. I'm a public speaker. I think that should be obvious. I love jury trials. I love to voir dire a jury panel. And frequently, whenever I would voir dire a jury panel, I would just ask them, have you heard anything about me? Have you seen me on television? Have you seen me in the newsprint? Have you seen me out doing advocate work, lobbying for this or lobbying for that or whatever? And the reason why I asked this question is because you can't go back into the jury room and hold it against my client because that my client's lawyer is out and transgendered. So, and then I would ask them, are you going to have a problem with that? And they would say, no, 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 no. And finally someone would say, yeah, I've got a problem with that. My Bible says this, blah, 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 blah. And I'd say, that's fine. Well, that was an automatic strike for cause. Well, then other jurors, even ones I'd asked, they would raise their hands and say, yeah, I have that problem too. Well, I got all those for cause strikes. I didn't have to use any peremptory strikes on those people. And I got rid of all the conservatives in that jury. So, you know, that's the way you build a reputation. And that's the way you get respect, is to know what you're doing.
So does it even ever come up anymore for you unless you bring it up?
No, it never does come up to me. And I bring it up often. As for instance, sometimes when I'm down at the courthouse and I'm chatting with lawyers that are friends of mine, and someone is relatively new to the group, and they are beginning to get chummy and they think they know me, but they don't yet. You know, I'll mention something in the conversation of back when I was in the Boy Scouts, and of course that doesn't that doesn't compute. And so I've learned later on that they'll ask somebody else, "What was she talking about being a Boy Scout?" And they'll say, "Oh, well, she's trans." Oh, well, then I either will see that person again because that person's cool with trans, or else I'll never see that person again. And so I always find little ways, and that's a good way, to out myself to people without wearing a sign on my forehead or without saying, "Oh, yeah, I'm glad to meet you. My name is Phyllis Fry, and by the way, I'm trans." I don't do that, but I always find ways to make people think and to ask questions of other people. What did she mean by that? What did she mean by that? And you know, so that's how I do it.
Well, I know that as long as you have been out as a trans woman, you have been an activist.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you, I mean, you're a natural leader, Boy Scouts, military, but how did you translate that into activism, and did you always know that you needed to be an activist?
You know, no, I never knew that I had to be an activist, but yes, I did have a lot of leadership training, and my parents, who disowned me, I got a lot of tenacity from them, and I'm sad that they disowned me, but they did. You know, when you lose 2 careers and every time you step out of the door, you're subject to arrest. You can either accept it or you can start to do something about it. So I wrote letters to city council, and one of the city council members was struck by it and called me into his office, and we talked about it. So he took me around and introduced me to all the other members of city council, and it took about 2.5 years, but eventually city council voted to repeal that ordinance, and I got active in the League of Women Voters, and I'm still a member of the League of Women Voters, and they weren't all glad to see me, but a lot of them were, and so I met a lot of good people there, and I got active in the women's movement here in the Houston area, and not all of them were glad to see me, but most of them accepted me. It was kind of a trial period, and I learned my chops from all of those different experiences. Let me give you my neighborhood for an example. My wife and I, when I transitioned in '76, we got our tires slashed, we got our house egged, we got graffiti painted in the driveway, we got all kinds of obscene phone calls during the Christmas holidays and during the Easter holidays. Now, why they came during that period, I don't know, but that's when they came. We stayed because we had a mortgage, we had to live someplace, and after a number of years, about 25 years or so, the people that didn't like us either moved, or they got over it, or they died. I outlasted them, and as a matter of fact, eventually, in the early part of this century, I got elected to the board of directors of our civic club association, and I was reelected 9 consecutive years, and I'm very out trans in my neighborhood of 5,000 homes, and the only reason why I left the board of the civic club is because as I was the secretary and as a municipal judge for the city of Houston, sometimes civic club would be at odds with the city, and that was a conflict of interest, so I had to get off the civic club board. But you can either hide yourself and have a miserable life, or you can fight. And I chose to fight, and I chose to fight back in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s. And again, transgender people, you can do whatever you decide you have to do, but it's 2016, it's time.
Well, and I know it hasn't always been success after success. I mean, you dealt with a lot, and I wanted to ask you this: your activism, did it help sustain you maybe in periods of depression, or when the weight of what was happening to you was becoming overwhelming?
The weight the first 10 years after I transitioned, between '76 and about '86, when my law practice finally began to take off and I began to actually earn money, significant money, and I started seeing successes at the courthouse and other successes. During that 10 years, it was horrible, and I had a lot of depression. In fact, I developed PTSD during that period of time, so that there are times, even today, whenever I do get radically, severely challenged, that I began to feel the PTSD coming back, and I have to deal with it. But you got to read my story, and anybody watching this, if you'll just Google New York Times, my name, you'll see a huge article that I was on the front page. Can you imagine the front page above the fold of the Sunday New York Times? Blew me away. And Deborah Sontag wrote a terrific article, and I was very flattered, and my law partners framed it. It's here in the office, and that covers most of my story. She even went to Texas A&M to where my archives are and spent a couple of days going through my archives. She found things I'd forgotten about.
Well, we are out of time. So Google, there's so much more to learn about your story and so much inspiration to draw. I just wanted to ask you this last question. I know you've stepped back from activism. You're not as active as you used to be. What are you doing for fun? What's next for you?
Well, actually, I'm enjoying my life. I've enjoyed my 60s because and that goes back to the grandmother hat that I wear. Around the turn of the century, maybe a few years before, a few years after, more and more and more transgender people were out of the closet. More and more trans bloggers were doing things. More and more transgender people were out doing lobbying at their state houses or at their city council chambers. More transgender people were lecturing at universities. More transgender people were writing stories and books, and television was changing and everything else. And I began to reach the point where, as much as I am, I believe, rightly loved by my community and respected by my community, and am a role model for my community, I'm no longer necessary for my community. And that is such a weight off of my shoulders. I'm no longer, I'm loved, I'm appreciated, I'm a role model, but I ain't needed anymore. You know, the community has a life of its own, and that's why I'm trying to give them and you tips on this thing about going after the journalists. They aren't asking the right questions.
I don't think I can advocate going after the journalists, but you
I can.
Right?
I just did. And get on the internet, go to the Houston Chronicle, and pull up my name, and you will see a written copy of the bathroom thing that was printed in the editorial section of the Houston Chronicle 2 Sundays ago.
That wraps up our discussion with Judge Frye. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you enjoyed our conversation today, please join us again next month for the next 10 Questions Live. It's slated for June 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be speaking with Keith Porcaro, who has some innovative technology solutions for the delivery of legal aid. And register for that at ambar.org/onair. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for joining us today. And
Absolutely. I had a great time.
Be well. Thanks.
I am well. Thank you.